Carl Jung documented something absolutely chilling about empaths: the moment they stop explaining themselves. This transformation is so terrifying that Jung called it the silent protocol, because when an empath finally goes quiet, they are not giving up. They are done being your emotional translator. Here is the secret mechanism Jung discovered, the one that turns the kindest people into weapons waiting to be forged. And you need to understand this before it is too late. Jung's clinic in Zurich became a sanctuary for broken empaths. Patient after patient arrived carrying invisible wounds. They showed up apologizing for taking up space. They blamed themselves for every failed relationship. They made excuses for abusive parents, cheating spouses, manipulative friends. These were not random victims walking through his door. Jung noticed they shared identical characteristics. They spoke in qualifiers and apologies. They minimized their own pain while explaining away other people's cruelty. They carried guilt that did not belong to them. They had become professional excuse makers for toxic behavior. Jung noticed something disturbing about these patients. They were not just victims of emotional abuse. They were walking databases of human psychology. Every empath who walked through his door had been unconsciously documenting behavior patterns for years. They knew exactly which words triggered their mother's rage. They had mapped their father's drinking schedule down to the hour. They could predict their partner's mood shifts before a single word was spoken. They had catalogued vulnerabilities with surgical precision. One patient could describe her husband's manipulation tactics in such detail that Jung felt like he was reading a clinical psychology textbook. Another could predict family dynamics 3 moves ahead like a chess grandmaster. They were not guessing. They were reading patterns most people could not see. Jung realized he was not treating damaged minds. He was sitting across from psychological geniuses in hiding. These empaths possessed what he called differentiated perception, the ability to process emotional information faster and more accurately than 99% of the population. Their brains worked like advanced pattern recognition software. They saw micro-expressions that lasted fractions of seconds. They felt emotional shifts in a room before anyone spoke. They detected lies, not through logic, but through instant psychological radar. Jung began testing this ability. He would bring colleagues into sessions without warning. Within minutes, his empath patients could identify childhood wounds, relationship patterns, and hidden insecurities with disturbing accuracy. They were not psychic. They were simply paying attention at a level most humans never reach. What others called intuition, these empaths called data collection. They noticed everything: the slight hesitation before someone answered a question, the micro-expression that flashed across a face for 1/10 of a second, the change in vocal tone that signaled discomfort, the body language that contradicted spoken words. But society had taught them this gift was a curse. Every time they tried to voice what they saw, people called them too sensitive. Every time they pointed out manipulation, they got accused of creating drama. Every time they expressed concern about obvious red flags, they were told they were overreacting. Family members told them they were imagining things. Partners accused them of being paranoid. Friends said they were looking for problems that did not exist. The message was clear and consistent. Your perceptions are wrong. Your feelings are invalid. Your reality is not real. So they learned to silence themselves, to doubt their perceptions, to apologize for seeing what others refused to acknowledge. And this is where the real damage happened. Jung discovered that empaths do not lose their minds from feeling too much. They lose their minds from being told their feelings are wrong. The constant invalidation creates a psychological split. Their conscious mind learns to distrust the very gift that makes them powerful. The empath starts second-guessing everything they see. Maybe they are too sensitive. Maybe they are creating problems. Maybe they are the crazy one. This self-doubt becomes a prison more effective than any physical cage. But here is what Jung found absolutely terrifying. That gift never disappears. It just goes underground. The empath keeps collecting data, keeps mapping patterns, keeps cataloging every betrayal, every manipulation, every lie. They just stop talking about it. Jung called this the victim stage. The empath becomes an emotional shock absorber for every toxic system they enter. They take on their family's dysfunction. They carry their partner's emotional baggage. They excuse behavior that would make other people run. They become the family therapist without a license, the relationship counselor who never gets counseled, the emotional janitor cleaning up everyone else's mess. And they do it all while apologizing for not doing enough. And the whole time, their unconscious mind is building something, a complete psychological profile of everyone who ever hurt them. Jung found that empaths in his practice could describe their abusers with accuracy that shocked him. They knew every trigger point, every insecurity, every fear, every weakness. One patient had unconsciously memorized her narcissistic mother's entire playbook, every guilt trip, every manipulation tactic, every emotional weapon. She could predict her mother's responses with such precision. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. That Jung started calling it the empath's invisible archive. They had never used this knowledge, not once. They had weaponized their intelligence only for understanding, never for destruction, until something pushed them past their breaking point. Jung identified a consistent trigger across his empath cases. The transformation always began with betrayal, not small disappointments or minor conflicts. Deep betrayal from someone the empath had completely trusted and protected. A partner's infidelity after years of devotion. A parent's cruelty after decades of excuses. A friend's backstabbing after endless support. The specific event varied, but the psychological mechanism stayed identical. The empath would discover undeniable evidence of betrayal. And in that moment, something catastrophic happened in their mind. All those years of collected data suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. Every warning sign they had ignored came rushing back. Every red flag they had explained away became impossible to deny. Jung documented this moment with clinical precision. He called it the collapse of the empathic defense system. For years, the empath had been using their intelligence to protect their abuser, finding reasons, making excuses, reframing cruelty as misunderstanding. But betrayal creates a crack in that defense system, and once that crack appears, the entire structure collapses. Suddenly, the empath sees everything they had been refusing to see, the lies they had believed, the manipulation they had excused, the patterns they had ignored. The true pain was not the betrayal itself. It was the realization that they had seen it coming all along. They had known. Their gift had been screaming warnings for months or years, and they had silenced it to keep the peace. One of Jung's patients described it as waking up from a nightmare, only to realize the nightmare was real life. Another said it felt like someone had turned on the lights in a dark room, and she could finally see all the monsters she had been sharing space with. Jung called this the clarity event, the moment when the empath's pattern recognition finally overwhelmed their need to believe the best in people. And this is where everything changed. Most people expected empaths to cry, to scream, to fall apart emotionally. Their abusers certainly expected that. They were prepared for tears and emotional chaos. They had contingency plans for guilt trips and manipulation. What happened instead terrified everyone involved. The empaths became unnaturally calm. Jung described it as the moment the victim realizes they have been playing chess while everyone else thought it was checkers. The emotional chaos everyone expected never came. Instead, there was an eerie stillness, a calculated quiet that made abusers more nervous than any outburst could have. Because for the first time, the empath was not reacting. They were observing, planning, deciding. Jung noted that this calmness was not numbness, it was focus. The empath's mind had finally stopped fighting itself. The conscious mind and the unconscious mind aligned for the first time. All that collected data was now accessible. All those observed patterns could finally be acknowledged. All that suppressed intelligence was free to operate. The empath did not attack, did not rage, did not seek revenge. They simply began to speak truth, with clinical precision, like a surgeon identifying each diseased organ before removing it. They revealed everything they had observed, catalogued, and silently endured. Not with cruelty, but with devastating accuracy. They exposed patterns their abusers thought were hidden. They articulated manipulations their abusers believed were subtle. They demonstrated understanding so complete, it felt like mind reading. Jung watched as his patients calmly recited years of manipulation tactics back to their abusers. They described every guilt trip, every gaslighting attempt, every projection, every triangulation. They laid it all out with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. And here is what made it truly terrifying. The empaths were not angry. They were done. There is a difference between someone who is fighting you and someone who is finished with you. Anger means you still care. Calm means you have already moved on mentally. This was not revenge. This was what Jung termed shadow integration under extreme duress. The moment when someone stops denying the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. The empath's shadow was not evil. It was their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength. For years, society had told them that seeing clearly was judgmental, that setting boundaries was selfish, that protecting themselves was mean. So they had repressed their shadow, the part of them that knew when to walk away, the part that recognized danger, the part that valued self-preservation. But betrayal forced that shadow to integrate. The empaths could no longer afford to be nice at the expense of being safe. They could no longer prioritize other people's comfort over their own sanity. They could no longer silence their intelligence to maintain false peace. And when they finally integrated these denied aspects of themselves, they became what Jung called psychologically complete. The transformation was permanent. These patients did not cycle back into people-pleasing. They did not apologize for their newfound boundaries. They did not second-guess their perceptions anymore. Jung followed these cases for years, waiting for the backslide, waiting for the guilt to pull them back into old patterns. It never happened. Once an empath integrates their shadow through betrayal, they never unsee what they have seen. They never unknow what they know. They had become what Jung feared most, empaths who could no longer be manipulated. Jung documented the immediate life changes that followed shadow integration. These transformed empaths left abusive relationships with strategic precision. They did not create drama or seek confrontation. They simply stopped participating in dysfunction. The exits were calculated, clean, final. No long explanations. No attempts to make the other person understand. No closure conversations that could be used as manipulation opportunities. Just direct action, followed by silence. They cut contact with toxic family members without emotional explanations. They walked away from manipulative friendships without backward glances. They rebuilt their lives on foundations of self-protection rather than self-sacrifice. Jung noticed that these empaths moved with purpose. They were not running away from something. They were moving towards something better, their own peace, their own mental health, their own authentic life. But the most disturbing change was not in their actions. it was in their presence. Jung observed that transformed empaths radiated something that made predatory people profoundly uncomfortable. Not aggression, not cruelty, something far more unsettling. Authenticity weaponized by intelligence. It is hard to explain what this looks like if you have never witnessed it. Imagine someone who sees through every social game but chooses not to play. Someone who recognizes manipulation the moment it starts but does not give it energy. Someone who knows exactly what you are doing and simply walks away. Manipulative people suddenly felt nervous around these empaths. They could not explain why. These empaths were not being hostile or confrontational, but everyone sensed that something fundamental had shifted. The emotional game board had been flipped. Jung identified what he called the predator's instinct. Manipulators unconsciously recognize when their usual tactics will not work. They sense psychological immunity the way vampires sense sunlight, and they avoid integrated empaths accordingly. The awakened empath becomes a living lie detector, not through judgment, but through presence. Their mere existence in a room reflects back psychological truths that others spend enormous energy hiding. This creates what Jung called the mirror effect. When a manipulator encounters an integrated empath, they suddenly feel exposed, naked, seen through. The empath does not have to say anything, does not have to call out behavior. Their presence alone creates discomfort because it reflects what the manipulator is hiding from themselves. Toxic people cannot stand to be around them. The reflected image is too uncomfortable. Meanwhile, authentic people feel safe with these empaths for the first time, because finally someone can see them clearly without trying to manipulate what they see. Jung documented how transformed empaths naturally attracted different people after integration. The users and takers disappeared. The genuine and authentic appeared. It was like they had changed their energetic frequency and could only connect with others on that same level. Jung spent years following these transformed patients. What he discovered kept him awake at night. These individuals had not become less empathetic. They had become perfectly strategic. They understood human psychology at a level that made them nearly omnipotent in social situations. They could read a room in seconds. They could identify power dynamics instantly. They could predict how conversations would unfold before they happened. They could see through facades that fooled everyone else. They could manipulate others as easily as they had once been manipulated. They saw emotional vulnerabilities instantly. They recognized psychological patterns before people finished sentences. They possessed the capacity to destroy anyone who would ever hurt them. One patient told Jung she could take down her narcissistic mother with 3 sentences. She knew exactly which truths would shatter her mother's false image. She had the ammunition. She had the intelligence. She had the understanding. Here is what truly terrified Jung. These transformed empaths chose not to use this power destructively. They could have ruined every person who had abused them. They had the knowledge. They had the intelligence. They had the strategic understanding. Instead, they simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. They did not seek revenge. They sought peace. Jung realized he had witnessed something beautiful and terrible, the weaponization of compassion itself. These empaths had become selectively compassionate. They no longer gave their gifts to everyone. They protected their energy like the precious resource it was. They offered their empathy only to those who had earned it through reciprocal respect. Jung wrote in his private notes that watching these transformations was like watching someone discover they had superpowers they did not know existed, and then watching them choose to use those powers for protection rather than destruction. These individuals had become what every manipulator fears most. Someone who can see through them completely, but no longer needs anything from them. The integrated empath. Someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserves their energy. Jung documented how these empath transformations created ripple effects through entire social systems. Family dynamics that had functioned for decades suddenly collapsed. Not because the empaths destroyed them, but because the empaths stopped enabling dysfunction. The families had been built on a foundation of the empath's sacrifice. The empath absorbed the anger. The empath smoothed over conflicts. The empath made excuses for bad behavior. The empath kept secrets. The empath maintained the facade. When the empath withdrew this service, the entire system had to reorganize. And most dysfunctional systems cannot survive reorganization. They were only functional because someone was doing massive amounts of emotional labor to hide the dysfunction. Alcoholic relatives were forced to face their addictions without emotional dumping grounds. Narcissistic parents had to find other sources of supply. Manipulative partners could no longer use these empaths as psychological punching bags. Jung observed that the families would often turn on the empath at this stage, call them selfish, accuse them of abandoning the family, guilt-trip them about loyalty. But the integrated empath no longer responded to these tactics. They had immunity. The awakened empath's transformation forced everyone around them to evolve or reveal their true nature. This is where Jung's research became truly fascinating. He documented two distinct patterns in how people responded. Healthy people in their lives grew stronger from their example. They learned that boundaries were possible, that self-respect was not selfish, that caring for others did not require self-destruction. These people would approach the transformed empath with curiosity. How did you do it? How did you finally break free? How do you stay strong against the guilt? They wanted to learn. They wanted to grow. They recognized the transformation as positive. Toxic people exposed themselves through desperate attempts to pull these empaths back into old patterns. They tried guilt. They tried anger. They tried playing victim. And when nothing worked, they finally showed who they really were. People who valued the empath's service more than the empath's well-being. Jung noticed that toxic people would go through a predictable cycle. First, they would try love bombing, being extra nice to pull the empath back. When that failed, they would try guilt, reminding the empath of everything they owed. When that failed, they would try anger, attacking the empath for changing. When that failed, they would try smear campaigns, telling everyone else the empath was the problem. The integrated empath watched all of this with clarity. They could see the manipulation cycles playing out exactly as they had predicted, and they did not engage, did not defend, did not explain. They simply maintained their boundaries and let toxic people expose themselves. Jung observed something he called the empath's mirror effect, taken to its logical conclusion. These transformed individuals did not have to actively confront anyone's dysfunction anymore. Their mere presence reflected issues back with uncomfortable clarity. Family members who had hidden behind the empath's emotional labor suddenly had to confront their own behavior. Couples who had used the empath as a buffer had to actually communicate with each other. Groups that had scapegoated the empath had to find a new target or address their actual problems. This is the peak of the transformation. The moment when the empath realizes their evolution is complete. They are no longer victims learning to set boundaries. They are forces of nature who have integrated every lesson. The empaths at this stage described feeling an unusual sense of power, not power over others, power over themselves. They finally controlled their own energy, their own time, their own emotional resources. Nobody could guilt them into giving more than they chose to give. Jung wrote that the awakened empath becomes a catalyst for truth. Their presence forces everyone to make a choice. Grow or leave. Evolve or reveal. Be authentic or be gone. There is no middle ground with someone who sees everything clearly. The kindest person you ever met has become someone you cannot afford to cross. Not because they will attack you, but because they will simply remove you from their life with surgical precision. And unlike before, there will be no second chances, no explanations, no opportunity to manipulate your way back in. Jung's research revealed something profound about the empath's journey. The transformation was not from sensitivity to numbness, not from kindness to cruelty, not from weakness to aggression. It was from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. The awakened empath still feels everything, still sees everything, still processes emotional information with supernatural precision. But now they choose what gets their energy. They choose who deserves their gifts. This distinction is critical. Many people confuse the integrated empath with someone who has become cold or shut down. Nothing could be further from the truth. The empath has not lost their abilities. They have gained control over them. Before integration, the empath was like a sponge that absorbed everything automatically. They had no filter, no protection, no choice. They soaked up everyone's emotions, whether they wanted to or not. It was exhausting, overwhelming, unsustainable. After integration, the empath becomes like a faucet. They can turn the flow on and off at will. They can direct their empathy where they choose. They can protect themselves when needed. They have agency over their own gift. Jung called this love with boundaries, the ability to care deeply about someone while protecting yourself absolutely, the capacity to offer compassion without accepting dysfunction, the strength to help others without sacrificing yourself. He spent years trying to articulate this concept because most people struggle to understand it. They think boundaries mean walls. They think protection means coldness. They think self-care means selfishness. But the integrated empath proves otherwise. They demonstrate that you can be incredibly warm to the right people while being completely unavailable to the wrong ones. That you can offer deep empathy to those who reciprocate while feeling nothing for those who exploit. These transformed empaths became living proof that you do not have to become cold to protect yourself from manipulation. You do not have to shut down your gifts to avoid being exploited. You simply have to stop apologizing for seeing clearly. Jung believed this transformation represented humanity's next evolutionary step. People who can feel everything without being destroyed by it, who can see everything without becoming cynical, who can love deeply without losing themselves. The conscious empath, the integrated human being. He wrote extensively about what he called the conscious minority, these individuals who had done the psychological work to integrate their shadows, who had faced their pain and emerged stronger, who had learned to trust their perceptions over social conditioning. Jung believed these people were essential for cultural evolution. They served as examples of what human consciousness could become, living demonstrations that you could be both sensitive and strong, both compassionate and boundaried, both loving and self-protective. His research proved that empaths are not naturally victims. They are naturally powerful. Their sensitivity is not their weakness. It is their weapon. Society just teaches them to suppress that power in the name of being acceptable, being polite, being easy to manage. The social conditioning starts early. Be nice, share everything, put others first, do not make waves, do not be difficult, do not trust your gut if it makes others uncomfortable, smile even when you are hurting, apologize even when you did nothing wrong. Empaths absorb this conditioning more deeply than others because they feel the social pressure more intensely. They sense disapproval before it is spoken. They feel rejection before it is expressed, so they learn to shape themselves into what others want. But when an empath stops explaining themselves, they are not giving up on communication. They are giving up on convincing people who are determined to misunderstand them. They are stepping out of a rigged game where their honesty gets weaponized against them. Jung documented how the empaths described this shift. One patient said it felt like she had been speaking a foreign language her whole life and finally decided to stop translating. Another said it was like she had been performing a play and finally walked off stage. The silent protocol is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming strategic with your warmth, not about shutting people out. It is about letting the wrong people leave, not about hiding your gifts. It is about sharing them only with those who have earned that privilege. Jung's most terrifying discovery about empaths: they were not the broken ones who needed fixing. They were the awakened ones who threatened every system built on manipulation and emotional exploitation. Systems need empaths to function as emotional shock absorbers. Families need someone to smooth over dysfunction. Workplaces need someone to do unpaid emotional labor. Relationships need someone to compromise endlessly. When empaths withdraw this service, systems collapse, and the systems will always blame the empath for that collapse. But the integrated empath no longer accepts that blame. They recognize it as one more manipulation tactic. The moment an empath stops explaining themselves is not a breakdown, it is a breakthrough. It is the birth of someone who finally trusts their own perceptions more than other people's projections. Someone who values their peace more than performative politeness. Jung spent decades studying this transformation because he recognized something profound. These empaths were not just healing themselves. They were modeling a new way of being human, conscious, compassionate, and completely unmanipulatable. He believed that watching an empath transform was like watching evolution happen in real time. The shift from unconscious victim to conscious warrior, from reactive absorber to strategic chooser, from people pleaser to self-protector. The transformation was not just personal, it was archetypal. Jung saw in these empaths the birth of a new kind of human consciousness, one that could hold both sensitivity and strength, both openness and discernment, both love and boundaries. So if you have ever felt like you are too sensitive, remember this: Jung's research proved you are not too anything. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Your sensitivity is not your weakness, it is your superpower. And the day you learn to wield it consciously is the day you become truly unstoppable. You are not too much for people who are enough for you. You are not difficult for people who value what you bring. You are not complicated for people who are willing to understand. You are simply incompatible with people who need you to be less than you are. Not dangerous to innocent people. Dangerous to those who mistake your kindness for weakness. Dangerous to systems built on your silence. Dangerous to anyone who thinks your empathy is something they can exploit forever. The world does not need more broken empaths apologizing for existing. It needs more awakened ones who know their worth. It needs people who can feel everything and still protect themselves, who can see clearly and still choose kindness, who can love deeply and still maintain boundaries. And Jung's research proves that transformation is not just possible, it is inevitable. Every empath will eventually face their moment of clarity, the betrayal that breaks the denial, the hurt that shatters the excuses, the pain that forces integration. The only question is whether you will direct that power or let life force it upon you, whether you will integrate your shadow consciously through inner work or unconsciously through crisis, whether you will choose your transformation or let it choose you. If you are an empath who has stopped explaining yourself to people determined to misunderstand you, drop a comment below. Let other empaths know they are not alone in this transformation. Share your moment of clarity. Describe what changed when you finally stopped apologizing for seeing clearly. And if you found value in Jung's insights, subscribe for more psychology that actually understands what you are going through. Hit that notification bell, because we are diving deep into concepts that most psychology channels are afraid to touch. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.